Hello and welcome. My name is Lexi Jong, and here I like to talk about luxury beauty and Fude brushes. Today we're taking a look at the CHIKUHODO FO series. So FO9 is the most recent brush. FO8 and FO9 were both released very recently, so I just picked up both of those. FO8 came out at the end of 2021. The rest of the series has been around for a while now, and I have had those for quite a while. So I figured this would be a great time to do an update. We'll go through each of the brushes, you know, if I'm still using them, loving them, and all of that as we go through these new ones. So let's start off with the FO9. This is the new brush, and this is the FO1 here, which was the powder brush in the series, essentially. The FO9, you can see, is going to be much larger. So you can see this is with the handles at the same length. And overall, the FO9, if you take a look at the way the bristles move here, density is going to be fairly similar between the two of these. However, you can see that this is just going to be overall much larger. And the FO9, it does really great for spreading out like loose powder, or, you know, it's essentially just a larger powder brush in my opinion. So if you take a look at the shapes, you can see that they are pretty close to each other, almost the same. This one here, you know, mine's just a little bit more square as it angles here compared to this one, which is slightly more rounded. And you can see the ferrules are going to be slightly different. They're both oval, but this one here is slightly more pinched on the FO9. And that might also have something to do with the size and everything as well. So these brushes, we've got these gorgeous wood handles, and we have the green ferrules. I have to say, out of the brushes in my set, I do have some of the greens are slightly different from each other. So we'll get to that. But the hairs in this set, they are silver fox hair, and they're incredibly soft. They're supposed to be slightly more resilient than some of the more delicate brush hairs, but they are incredibly soft. So some people consider the hair to be more like the softness of squirrel, but the resiliency of goat. I would not say that they are as strong as goat. You know, they are a finer hair. I would treat them delicately personally. I know some people do use these brushes with silver fox hair with cream and liquid products. I personally don't recommend it because I do feel like they are fine. And the biggest reason why you don't want to use cream products with delicate haired brushes is because as the cream dries, even if it's only drying there for a few minutes, then when you go to kind of wash it off, essentially you have this like hard cast on the outside of the hair fiber that can actually, you know, sometimes the product is going to be heavier than the hair itself, especially a delicate hair, and it can cause that hair to actually break off. So that's why you don't really use creams and liquids with more delicate hair fibers. I would put those in this category personally. So the FO9, I think, is a great big brush, really nice powder brush. Let's take a look at a few others. This one here is the CHIKUHODO PFO. So this one here is going to be the same hair fibers, essentially. I have to say my FO9, it feels just slightly silkier. I'm not sure exactly why, if it's because the PFO here is more dense, so you don't maybe notice it quite as much, but I do have to say my FO9 feels a little bit softer. But take a look, you can see that the PFO is going to be incredibly dense, and this is going to be better for buffing compared to the FO9, which is really great in my opinion for a light dusting of powder. Whether it's loose or pressed, it really performs well in that function. So another difference between these is the PFO is going to have a round ferrule versus the oval ferrule here. Let's take a look at a few more. This one here is the Kairedo Kiwami brush, the face brush. And this is, here's the Surratt face brush as well. So you can see that they're going to all be slightly smaller than the FO9. And these are both going to be round ferrule brushes. So just so you can see the difference one more time, you can see obviously the FO9 is larger from the top, it's larger from the sides, Part of that's going to be because of the more oval ferrule. It's going to be a little bit wider, but regardless, if you look at them, like if you look at the narrow side, this is just bigger overall. And a couple of the rougher brushes I wanted to compare. So this one here is the 30. This is their most recent powder brush. It is a round ferrule. You can see the diameter here is definitely going to be thinner. And we do have slightly longer hair fibers in the rougher. This is going to be goat. It's actually very, very soft though. They definitely used a nice quality hair here. And then take a look at this versus this. Now you can see, because the goat hair fibers are slightly thicker, like each hair itself is a little bit thicker in diameter, that makes it a little bit stiffer, a little bit more resistant to moving. So if you take a look at the motion of the movement of these fibers, they move and they flow very nicely, but they have a little bit stronger of a kickback to go back into their normal position than the FO9, which is a little bit softer and more delicate. So they tend to be a little bit slower to kick back in this case. They flow a little bit more, if that makes sense. And then we have the F05 brush here. Mine got a little kinked because of the way it dried, so just ignore the little kink here. But we've got this one here, which is going to be an oval ferrule, but it's not really so pinched. The rougher is actually going to be a little bit wider than the CHIKUHODO. And, you know, I have to say the rougher is going to be, I don't think there's necessarily like more hairs or anything. I just think because of the shape, this one's a little bit more round. It comes across as slightly bigger. You can also see that it is a little bit longer. And you can see this one here isn't going to be quite as flowy as the FO9. So this one also has the rougher one, it also has a little bit more resiliency. It's a firmer hair fiber in general. It has a little bit more structure and roughness to it, which helps it pick up the product a little bit better versus a smoother follicle like these. So I think it's really going to depend what kind of product you're looking for, but this is going to give you more of like that soft airbrush. This, I mean, same thing. It's going to give you a soft airbrush look, but it has a little bit more buffing capability. It's not a buffing brush. It just buffs a little bit more so than the FO9. And the last one I wanted to compare to are the Beautylish Lunar New Year brushes. They're pretty much all the same, or they're supposed to all be the same shape and everything. So I just wanted to take out one. So this one's the Year of the Ox, but you can see here that the FO9 is going to be a little bit longer in hair and it's going to be bigger in general. So the Beautylish brush is an oval ferrule as well, but you can see that it is going to be wider in diameter. This one's going to be a little bit more pinched. It's a little bit more narrow here, but it's going to be a little bit wider going this way here, just slightly. I don't even know if you can really tell, but you can see that, you know, you can still see some of the FO9 peek through this. They're close, but this is going to be a little bit wider this way, and the Beautylish is going to be a little bit wider this way, or a little bit deeper essentially. And that's going to result in a slightly different shape. This one here is squirrel hair. And you can see with a soft fiber that this one's going to kind of flow as well because of the shape of this and the fact that, well, it's fox and not squirrel. It's going to be just a little bit more, it's a slightly silkier movement here, you can see. And that's not always going to be true with fox versus squirrel in general, but with these particular shapes, that's how these perform. So while we have the powder brushes out, let's just take a quick look at the FO1 brushes. With those, starting with the Beautylish, you can see that the FO1, I'll put the FO9 here for comparison, but you can see that the FO1 is going to be closer in size to the Beautylish. It is going to be smaller. This is smaller all the way around than the Beautylish brush here. And the hair length is pretty close to the same. This is going to have a little bit There's a little bit more gradation going in this. It's a little bit more domed versus this one, which is a little bit more like arced at the top and straighter on the sides, if that makes sense. And part of that is emphasized by the fact that this is going to be a little bit more ovular than this one, which is closer to a rounder ferrule. The F04 brushes, we've got the 30 followed by the 25. You can see that these are all going to be much larger than the F01. So not too much different to say in comparison with there, but just for size difference here. And here is the Surratt and the CHIKUHODO, which is going to be just like the Suku squirrel. And you can see that these shapes are going to be pretty different. This one's almost more of a paddle shape in comparison because these are both round ferrules. And you can see the way that this one swirls compared to the FO9. The FO9 being a little bit bigger just has a little bit more lag time. It's a little bit of a slower silky swirl compared to the FO1, which has just a slightly stronger kickback. And that's going to be because we have that shorter brush length here. So it creates the sense of a higher density. One more brush I wanted to compare. This is the CHIKUHODO KZ1, which is no longer in existence, but this is technically an oval ferrule. It looks almost round. It's very close to being round, but it is oval. And just so you can see the size difference, here it is with the FO9. And I'm not going to dwell on this brush because, you know, it is discontinued, but it is incredible if you are lucky enough to have it. But here's the size difference between the FO1. Aside from the different shape, they are pretty similar in size. The KZ1 is slightly longer in hair, but because of the way these are bundled, it does have a little bit more density, has a little bit more buffing capability than the FO1. But I have to say, because of the way these go, these center bristles here really do feel like they stay a little bit stiffer than, for example, those in the FO9, which really feels a little bit airier. And yeah, that's kind of the difference with those. Now let's take a look at the CHIKUHODO F02. And this is a really great buffing brush. This is considered the foundation brush. And you know, if you look at certain sites, they do say it's okay to use this with cream foundation. But if you look at the Japanese sites, most of them actually recommend this for powder products, so powder foundation. And this is great for buffing. You can see it's a very dense, cute little brush. I personally don't use this with foundations. I prefer a larger foundation brush. So regardless of the particular product that I'm using it with, whether it's cream, liquid, or powder, I prefer something larger. So for me, I use this mostly for blushes because I think it's a great buffing brush for blushes. And let's just take a look at a few other sizes. This one here is the F04 17, which is one I use for cream blush in particular. You can see it's going to be a little bit smaller in diameter, and you can see that this one here has longer hairs. It's bigger all around. Take a look at that motion versus this one. The F04 is going to be a little bit stiffer, and that's because we do have these shorter hairs here, and because it is a different hair type. This is really great for cream products, but for powder products, I really like the softness you get from this. It's not going to cause any facial irritation. And for a lot of people who choose to go with these brushes, that's one of the reasons they go with the Silver Fox hairs, because it is so incredibly soft, but yet it performs really well with products. So if you have very sensitive skin that perhaps gets irritated by even very soft brushes, this can often be a hair type that works well for those with sensitive skin. Now, some other sizes here. This is the CHIKUHODO T3. And you can see that these are going to be pretty comparable in size for the hair length. The T3 head is going to be a little bit bigger. I think the diameter is actually pretty similar here, but the T3 is just a little bit bigger, and it allows it to splay out a little bit more. This is undyed goat hair, so we are going to have a little bit more blooming of the brush compared to the F02. The F02 having those softer fibers, they kind of gather together a little bit more and stay more tightly bundled essentially, whereas a brush, after you wash and use it a lot, most brushes will bloom or they'll blossom. The hairs will kind of separate a little bit more, and because of this particular fiber being a little bit thicker and so forth, we have more blooming with the T3, but they're pretty comparable in size otherwise. This is a great brush as well. You can see it's very, very dense. It's going to be pretty similar to the Rephr. I do think this one is a little bit softer than the Rephr. And the larger size here helps as well. So I like both of these for cream blushes, but again, for powder, I prefer this. Now, just a few size comparisons. These are some foundation brushes. This is a Surratt foundation brush, and this is number 31 from Rephr. And you can see they both have kind of those stippling fibers here. They have a similar shape, but their size is going to be different. You can also see that these are angled. So just wanted to show you kind of how these kind of fit. The FO2 kind of fits right in between the sizes of those. So it's a little bit harder to tell because of the angle here, but the FO2 is just ever so slightly larger than the Surratt foundation brush. It's just a little bit wider in diameter, and then it's going to be smaller than the 31 from Rephr. And last size comparison, this is the mini base from Sonyoji in the Kiyaki set. This is a brush that's now in the Fusion series as well, but just wanted to show you the difference in diameter here. And you can see that these brushes and the classic base along with that, they're going to have more of this kind of motion. They're not going to be as dense or as firm, so they won't buff the product quite as much. And these brushes are a mix of undyed goat hair and synthetic fibers, so they are meant to be used with creams and liquids or powders, whereas I would use the FO2 exclusively with powder personally. Moving on to the F03 brush. And you can see that this is a cheek brush, and it's kind of like your standard traditional shape here for the cheek brush. And, you know, size-wise and shape-wise, this one here is a Rephr 05. You can see that these have a pretty similar shape, and they're pretty similar in size. The F03 is going to be a little bit longer in hair, and it's also a little bit wider going this way. This is a little bit more of a pinched ferrule. This one has an oval ferrule, but it's not really that pinched. And so the F05 really does better, or not the F05, the Rephr 5 does better going more in this sweeping motion here because it has that ovular shape and it's a little bit more pinched. Whereas this one, you can do more of a swirling motion. Even though it's an oval, it's closer to a round ferrule and it's not quite so pinched. So it's a little bit airier, a little fluffier. And other ones to take a look at, this is the soft cheek from Sonyoji. This one is a round ferrule. This is how that one's going to go. This is going to be airy as well, but it's not going to have quite that same type of movement. You can see that the bristles on this are a little bit stiffer, and just size-wise, they're pretty much the same length, but this is just overall bigger. So it's going to create kind of a different movement pattern as well. We also have the Surratt cheek brush. You can see the size difference here. And this one is very, very soft, has a very nice movement. It's a little bit less airy because it's smaller overall. And there we go. So this one, it's just has a slightly denser texture to it, mostly due to being a little bit more compact in the brush head. The CHIKUHODO Z4. So you can see that this is smaller overall, but they actually do have a very similar shape. I would say that the F03 is a little bit more of an oval compared to the Z4, but this is technically an oval. At first glance, it might look round, but it's not completely round. And this is kind of like a smaller version than the F03, but you can see that they are actually kind of similar in shape. It's just that this one is a little bit more narrow. This is the CHIKUHODO KZ4. Again, this one has been discontinued, so not going to dwell on it, but this one is going to be a round ferrule in comparison. The bristles have kind of the same shape, but it's going to be round instead of ovular. And just so you can see the movement of this, very, very soft, pretty similar in movement to the F03. So just something to note, they are going to be a little bit similar. This one's just going to be a little bit airier. Classic Cheek from Sonia G. This is going to be shorter and denser. This is going to be a little bit better for buffing things in because it's undyed goat hair. You can use it with creams and liquids. And then we have the Cheek Pro, which you can see is going to be much shorter. It's ovular, but it is pinched. So this is going to be a little bit more of a denser feeling and better for a sweeping motion in this case than a swirling motion. And so in that sense, the F03 is a little bit more versatile as to what movement you prefer. But again, this is going to be better for like soft washes of color and so forth because it does have kind of like that airier feeling to it. You don't want to use it if you were trying to buff out a blush. If you're putting on like a light soft wash of color or something, this will work really well. Next up, we have the CHIKUHODO F04, which has actually become like one of my favorite brushes. This is an angled cheek brush, and just for a few comparisons, this is from the Sonia G Lotus series. This is the detail brush. Just wanted to show you the angle here. You can see that this is more of a straighter edge, whereas this kind of curves a little bit more. Obviously, the F04 is a lot larger, and this detail brush is, you know, intended for like highlight and so forth. The F04, I actually really love for bronzer. I love it for cheek products in general, but this has become a go-to bronzer brush for me. This here's the CHIKUHODO. I can't remember what the number is. I'll have to put that on the screen. But you can see here that they actually have kind of the same shape, but the CHIKUHODO is much larger. This is a blend of hairs here. And yeah, so this is another bronzer brush that I really like, but I don't know, there's something about this one. It's like soft. The size of it is great for me. So it's just really like a favorite. Between the two of these, the F04 is softer than the CHIKUHODO, but this is a very soft brush as well. And then we have the Kyoto Akabeko brush, which was Lunar New Year for 2021. And you can see, again, they do have a similar shape. This is going to be, you can see that this kind of drops down a little bit more dramatically than it does here in the Akabeko. And the Akabeko is larger. This is squirrel. This is going to be airier in general, whereas this is very, very soft, but it is a little bit more compact, has a slightly denser texture to it in general. These are my two favorite brushes for bronzer though. So these are definitely the ones that I love and reach for the most for bronzers. All right, next up, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are all eyeshadow brushes. This one here is F05, and it's a large eyeshadow brush. And let's take a look at a few comparisons. This is a CHIKUHODO Z5. You can see it's going to be a little bit shorter, and you can see that the movement of this with the longer bristles is going to be a little bit more sweeping. You know, I have to say I like the F05. I think it's great for a one and done. But if you're trying to be a little bit more careful with placement, the Z5 is going to be better for that because it's a little bit shorter. This one here is the Worker 2 from Sonia G. You can see that's going to be a lot shorter. And this one's going to be even a little bit more precise. And it can also be used with creams and liquids. So a few more. We have the Suku L brush. And you can see that this one here is going to be a little bit more narrow. It actually splays out a little bit more so, whereas this stays pretty much more in the same position. This is really great for kind of this sweeping, and it's a little bit denser feeling. The L brush is airier, and this is more multi-use because you can put it like in the crease, the socket, and things like that a little bit more easily. Whereas the F05, I feel like really just works best for, you know, a monolid color. And then a few more comparisons. This is the Jumbo Blender. There is a bigger version of this as well, but it's the same brush head. So you can see this is going to be shorter. It's also going to be a little bit denser. And yeah, you know, this is going to put on a pigmented color a little bit more strongly than the F05. And then last up, we have the KZ6, which is probably like one of my favorite one and done eyeshadow shades or brushes. But you can see this is going to be shorter, and it's really soft. The fibers here actually start to go up and increase in length as we get up here. So we have more of a point at the top compared to the F05, which is a little bit more ovular. So I just feel like this is a little bit more useful for me. I have to say I don't use the F05 that much. Next up, let's take a look at the F06. You can see this is more of a shader style brush, but it's very narrow and it comes a bit to a point. Up here, you can see that it kind of arches. So let's take a look at a few comparisons here. This is going to be the Builder one from Sonia G. You can see that they actually have a very similar shape, but the Builder one's a little bit wider and shorter. So there's that. Next up, this is the Surratt Classique eye brush. This is the medium brush. And you can see that they're actually very, very close. This is my closest match to it, but you can see that the F06 is just slightly smaller. They have the same hair length, but it's gonna be not quite as wide in diameter. So it's essentially the same, probably the same amount of like hairs and everything. It's just that this is gonna be more pinched on the Surratt. So it makes it kind of a little bit wider there. Next up, this is the CHIKUHODO KZ7, and you can see they're kind of similar, but the KZ7 is just slightly bigger, and yeah, it's just a little bit bigger kind of all around. Hair length is slightly longer in the KZ7 as well. This is the Suku, I believe it's the F brush. You can see that that is going to be a little bit wider and it's more square versus this one, which is going to be more narrow in general. This one comes to more of a point. And the F 02, you can see they are comparable in size. The F06 is going to be longer in hairs, but it's also going to be more narrow. And that's how those compare. And this one's dirty, but this is the Sonia G Soft Shader. So you can see the Soft Shader and the Worker Pro are kind of similar in size and shape. This is probably going to be closest to the Worker Pro from the Sonia G series. Unfortunately, mine is drying right now, but yeah, the Worker Pro is just slightly more narrow than the Soft Shader. So they're going to be kind of close. All right, and then we have the CHIKUHODO F07, which you can see is going to have a round ferrule. It does come a little bit to a point up here. And one of the ones I wanted to compare this to is actually the F 26. They're pretty close in shape and size, I would have to say. I really like them. Look at the density. So the 26 is going to be just a little bit stiffer than the F07 here. And I think these are both great brushes. I like them for inner corner, lower lash line, that type of thing. And then in comparison, we have the T8 from CHIKUHODO. This is gonna just be a little bit more, like it narrows to a point a little bit more so than the F07, but they're pretty comparable in size. This is the CHIKUHODO, I think it might be the Z8, I forget the number, but again, this one's gonna narrow to the point a little bit more. It's a little bit smaller in diameter, but they're almost the same in diameter. And then last up, this is the Suku brush, squirrel hair brush, that's no longer in existence. Forget what this one was called, but you can see this one's gonna be a little bit bigger. It's a little bit rounder on the top, and it's a little bit bigger overall. So, and then we have the new F08. This is, you know, kind of more of a traditional liner style brush. You can see that we've got kind of the curved edges here, but it's going to be like stiff and dense, you know, able to kind of edge something softly. You're not going to get the crispest line, you know, because it is very soft hairs, but it'll be a pretty crisp line if you're using a powder product. The closest match I have is the Sonia G Flat Definer. This is one from the Kiyaki set, but it also comes in the Sky Eye set. You can see they're pretty similar, but the hair length is a little bit longer in the Sonia G. Shape-wise is pretty similar, but this is going to be a little bit flatter on top, whereas this angles up a little bit more. But they're going to perform pretty similarly. This is the Builder one from Sonia G. You can see this one's going to be a little bit more rounded, and it's a little bit bigger overall. And those are going to be my two big comparisons for that. You know, it's a pretty standard brush shape, so it's chances are you have something like this already. But I do think this is a really nice brush. It does not cause irritation, which is so nice. All right, so real quickly, let's go through the brushes. I'll give you my thoughts on these. The F09, I think, is a really nice powder brush. If you're in the market for a really soft powder brush that I personally like it for, you know, loose powder or pressed powder, but a very soft or small amount of product, I think this is a great product or great brush for that. And yeah, I would recommend it. It's one of my favorite brushes in the series now. And then let's work our way backwards. So the F08, I think, is a great brush. Again, it's kind of a traditional shape. I think most people probably have something like this in the collection, so it's not necessarily a must-have, but if you are collecting, I do think it is a really nice one to add to your collection. F07, I like this eye brush. Again, it's not, you know, a unique shape or size or anything. I personally like this for inner corner, lower lash line for something soft and smudge out. That's pretty much my major use for that. I have to say I like the eye brushes in this series, but I tend to reach more so for my Sonia G eye brushes and my rougher eye brushes than these. They're just a little bit softer for certain pigments. F06, this one here, I have to say I don't really use this one much. I use the other eye brushes more so than this one. This one is narrow enough to put in the inner corner as well. And it's a little bit small for a shader for me. I'd like it to be a little bit bigger. It works nicely, but it's not a favorite. And the F05, I like this for one and done, but I do actually prefer like the KZ6, just because, or like the Suku L brush, because I feel like those are a little bit more versatile with their shape. They're able to go like in the socket a little bit more smoothly, whereas this feels a little bit more dense when going in that type of application. So I like the eye brushes and I use them, but they are not my favorite eye brushes out of my particular collection. Moving on to the F04, as I mentioned, this is one of my favorite brushes. I use this every week. You know, it's one of those brushes where after I use it and I wash it, you know, I can't wait to use it again. So I love this for bronzer and blush, especially if I'm trying to put on makeup and use as few brushes as possible. You know, I like the kind of the way this one functions because it does work so well for bronzer, works so well for blush. I can even use this tip for highlight. I can use this for, you know, putting powder in strategic places. It's just a really versatile brush. Out of all of the ones in this series, this is my favorite. It's my most used. And I have to say, when I originally got it, I didn't think I'd use it that much. So it's a fantastic brush. I really like it. F03, I think, is a great blush brush. There's nothing special or unique about the shape or the size of it. Yeah, I'm sure there are others that are comparable, but I really like it. Again, because it is a very soft brush, you're going to want to use something that, you know, you don't need to buff in and you don't need to be too cautious with. If you are working with something very pigmented and you just get a little product on, this is great to get like a soft sweep of it. Or, you know, if you're working with a really light blush and you don't have to worry about being careful, you can kind of put this on nicely and get this in soft layers. So I think it's a nice brush, and I do like this one and use that one pretty regularly. But again, if you're looking for the most unique brush in the set, it's probably not going to be that. The FO2, I really like this one for buffing in. So if I am working with a more pigmented blush, oftentimes I'll use this to get the product on my face in just a small amount so I don't overdo it. But then I like to use the FO2 to kind of buff that product in and really smooth it out, make sure the pigments are well blended into my cheek. So I really like this one. Again, there are other brushes, similar size and shape, but the softness of this one is by far, it's way more soft than the other ones I have that are similar. The FO1, I think, is a nice brush. You know, it's technically a powder brush and I've used it that way. I still do use it that way, but I tend to reach for it more for blush and more so for like those lighter blushes. Like for example, the Chanel La Comète in the Pêche Cosmique, which is kind of like more of a highlighter. I can put that on my cheek, you know, something light that I don't, you know, if I want like a larger swath of color, I think this is a great brush for it. And it's just, it's really soft. So I do like it. Overall, I prefer the face brushes in this set over the eye brushes. I find the eye brushes, they work fine, but they're just not as functional as ones that I have from other brands. So I tend to reach more for the face brushes from this series. Overall, I really love all of them. I purchased my brushes from Visage USA because they do offer engraving. It's $2 for engraving per brush. And this is the Amazon BT, so it's like scripted. So I got my name Lexi in there. And yeah, you can see here though that some of my green ferrules are a little bit different than others. My F01 is brighter here than my F02. So just something to note. And you know, that's gonna happen in brush series. You can see like the hair colors are all gonna be slightly different and everything as well, because again, they are natural variations. So I would love to know if you have this set or if you have any of the brushes from it, what your thoughts are, and let me know down below in the comments. And I hope to see you again very soon. So have a great day and stay safe and healthy.